Tonight we're in Birmingham. Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Paul Scully, Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, an MP since 2015 and a campaigner for Brexit in the 2016 referendum. Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Health, former advisor to Gordon Brown and Ed Miliband, Jon Ashworth. Layla Moran, elected as an MP in 2017 by overturning a majority of 10,000, now Liberal Democrat spokesperson for education. First Vice President of the European Parliament and an MEP for Fine Gael, Mairead McGuinness, and journalist and author Isabel Oakeshott. Welcome on this Halloween night to our panel, to our audience here, and of course you at home. Join in the conversation. You can argue along in the usual fashion using hashtag BBCQT on Facebook, on Instagram and on Twitter. Right, let's get started with our first question tonight, which is from Fiona Murray.
Can a general election solve the Brexit crisis?
Well, Mairead, we've got you here on the programme tonight. I mean, it's the 31st of October. I guess you thought you'd be talking about something else, like we were going to be out. Goodbye, Britain.
Well, I think that's why I was invited to be on this programme, because
we're always glad to have you, Mairead.
The invitation came before there was talk of an election. So, yes, I think we had all anticipated that this would be, if you like, Brexit Day. I think your question about how a general election can solve it, I suppose there's been 3 years where there has been no solution, but I think we're closer to getting a resolution. From a European Parliament point of view and the European Union, we would like to move on. We would like to get to the next phase of this. I'm not sure how an election will turn out. So
do you think it will solve the Brexit crisis? That's the question.
Well, we've had an election in the past that didn't. It exacerbated the problem to some extent. So I'm not sure what will happen this time. And I think it's too early. The campaign hasn't started. We knew there would be an election. I think Boris Johnson was looking for that. I think it is interesting, though, that the withdrawal agreement got through a first stage in the House of Commons. So that was the first time we saw that there was some progress. I think the fact that we're going to move into 2020 and Brexit is not finished is quite extraordinary. And I think as an audience, you must find that extraordinary, whichever way you voted. That, you know, imagine 2016 and 2020.
So, Mairead, can I ask you, were you surprised in the EU that Boris Johnson didn't push on with his withdrawal?
Well, I thought he might, and I'm not sure why. Perhaps these other panellists will understand why he decided to freeze the process rather than move along with it, because there was some time that the House of Commons could have looked at the details of the bill, and perhaps the House of Lords, and it perhaps could have been done with a slight extension. But look, there may be other reasons why the Prime Minister decided he needed to go to the country, perhaps to get an overall majority, but that was tried in the past by the last Prime Minister, and I'm sure other people on this panel have other hopes and dreams for what might come of the next election. Well, but whatever way, I think the uncertainty is awful. It's awful for you, I think it's awful for us, it's awful for business, and it's awful for Europe as a whole. There are so many other issues that we need to deal with at a European level, and you need to deal with nationally, so it's not good.
So, Layla Moran, the Lib Dems are pushing for this election at the back end of last week. This is clearly something you want to happen, presumably before revoke Article 50 could possibly become something that is obsolete if the election doesn't go your way.
Indeed. So we really wanted...
That was a solitary and rather pathetic move, I may say.
We really wanted... Actually, the cleaner way to have done this would have been to put the Brexit deal in a referendum back to the people and ask them if that's what they wanted. But as you've just heard from Mairead, it got through. Boris Johnson's bad Brexit deal got through off the back of Labour votes. Through that second reading.
Yes, but we know about this, Layla. Will a general election solve the Brexit crisis? That's a question.
We felt that this was the only way that the public could have their say on this deal and get their say on if they want Brexit at all. Brexit has been... Crisis is the right word. Fiona, you're absolutely right. This is a crisis. It's a national embarrassment. We need to move on. And there is no other way to actually make this stop. And perhaps that's one thing we can all agree on. We need to make this stop. We need to focus on other things, and that's why the Liberal Democrats are standing on a manifesto commitment to stop Brexit once and for all. No deal and further negotiation, no, let's negotiate another deal and put it back and another... No, we would make it stop on day one. We'd move on and talk about public services and everything else that people actually want politicians to deal with right now.
So Jon, for Labour, I mean, I didn't get the impression that Labour was desperately keen to come to the general election.
We're keen for an election. When you look,
when you say you're keen now, do you think it will solve the Brexit crisis?
I tell you, when there's 4.5 million people on the waiting list and over 600,000 waiting beyond 18 weeks for treatment, we're desperately keen for a general election.
You weren't bounced into it by the Lib Dems, the SNP calling for it before you.
No, we've been calling for a general election.
No, but I mean, once the EU had made a decision about the extension.
Times. But to answer Fiona's question, can this general election solve the Brexit crisis? Well, it has to. Because today we were supposed to leave the European Union. Boris Johnson promised us that on the 31st of October we would leave the EU, do or die. He said he would rather die in a ditch than not leave. Well, I've not noticed if he's in a ditch or not tonight.
Well, actually, we haven't seen the last few hours.
Boris Johnson has failed
presumably
on his solemn pledge to the British people. So we do need a general election, and in that general election, I'm sorry, I don't think it's democratic just to cancel Brexit. I voted Remain as well, but I don't think you can just say, oh, we'll cancel it. I think the democratic thing to do is put it back to you guys, is put it back to the British people and give you a referendum.
Fiona, you asked this question. Do you think a general election is the way to solve the Brexit crisis?
No, I don't. And for one thing, what happens if we have a hung parliament? Where does that leave us? What happens then? And I agree entirely with what Mairead was saying about the fact that Boris didn't need to call a general election at the moment because he'd got the Withdrawal Act through the second reading. So why did he call a general election for December? Just before Christmas. We don't want to be thinking about a flipping general election. We want to be getting out and buying our Christmas presents.
So Paul Scully, why didn't Boris Johnson stick with trying to get withdrawal? Particularly given that during the leadership campaign, Boris Johnson said it would be the height of folly to have an election before Brexit.
Because we are where we are, where we're in a situation where Boris has tried to inject some positivity, some energy, some enthusiasm into this whole debate. And I think whatever you think about Boris, whatever you think about the direction he's taken, you cannot fail to see that he has a sense of direction. That
so
he
why
wanted
didn't
to
he
leave
stick with trying to get the bill through Parliament?
By October the 31st. We've tried twice now. We should now be talking about how we're leaving, not still whether we're leaving. And what has happened is that he put the bill through Parliament, and yes, people agreed to that first stage, the second reading. But it was clear by voting down the programme motion that they were going to be playing games.
Boris Johnson playing games
with the bill. They're talking about the customs union, which is all part of the second
democratic
part. This is all part of the future relationship, not how we leave the EU.
Taking back
so it's absolutely clear that the only way that we can get this sorted out is through a general election. We have a parliament that does not represent public view at the moment. Does not represent
Isabel.
So look, the truth is that there is a horrible possibility, as the lady there said, that this general election will not actually solve the Brexit situation because there could well be a hung parliament. And the only way that this election will solve the Brexit situation is if there is a big Leave alliance. So that will involve the Tories swallowing their pride and doing some kind of deal, whether it's informal or formal, with the Brexit Party. Otherwise, what will happen is that the Leave vote will be split up and down the country, and the Tories will not be able to win a majority and will be all the way back where we were to begin with. And I would just like to ask Layla here, I am genuinely bewildered. This is a genuine question here. Your idea is just to stop Brexit. I just wonder what you think the 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit are actually going to do if you just scrap it. Do you think that they are just going to kind of slope off and accept that they were too wrong, they were really stupid, they're just going to go back where they came from?
No. Don't put words in my mouth.
No, I'm asking you what you think. I'm asking you what you think.
No, not at all. First of all, to make sure it's very clear, if the Liberal Democrats are elected in a majority government on a Stop Brexit manifesto, then that's what we're going to do. That's exactly what we're going to do.
But that doesn't answer my question about all the people that voted to leave.
Can I just say, I think most people now are sick of these panels talking about Brexit all the time.
So let's get it
Well,
done.
tell you what,
Let's
let's speak to the audience then and see what they think.
It's the NHS, it's schools, and actually the only way to make Parliament talk about anything else in the next few years is to stop Brexit. Actually, I think they'd appreciate that.
Okay, well, let's ask them. Let's ask them, because there's lots of hands. I'd like to hear from lots of you. Yes, the young man there in the T-shirt.
Well, I was too young to vote in the referendum. However, it was a democratic choice. The Lib Dems and the Labour Party are an absolute disgrace. The Liberal Democrats don't even know what democracy means, and the Labour Party's manifesto of 2017 was to deliver Brexit.
Right.
And all they've done is vote against it at every chance. Bring on a general election, and I hope Boris gets a majority, delivers Brexit, and defeats a Marxist Jeremy Corbyn government.
Yes, the woman there.
So I'm just curious as to how many MPs have quarterly reviews, because if you were in any other job other than the one you're in, I'd have you all on performance improvement plans.
For everybody. Okay. Yes, the woman there.
So, Paul, you said that the government doesn't represent the population, but...
No, I said Parliament doesn't represent.
The Parliament, sorry. The Parliament doesn't represent the population, but this is the third time that we're asking people who they want to represent them. But we haven't asked them for an up-to-date opinion on where they stand today. We're quoting 17 million people. Do every single one of those 17 million people still feel the same? Yeah.
Yes.
And every voice in this audience is a single voice, so that isn't an answer to that question. We don't know. We actually don't know.
I'll answer that.
People may have gone in both directions.
I'll take a few more points, and then, Paul, you can answer. The man at the back with his hand in the black top.
Is this election going to be on anything aside from Brexit? Are there actually... I'm a working GP in the NHS, and I see day after day access problems being a massive, massive issue. But it seems as this is just going to be a second referendum, pretty much. If you voted Leave or you voted Remain, you just want to see what your politicians actually voted for, really. And I think we need to kind of focus on other issues as well as Brexit.
Okay. And the woman here in the corner.
I voted Remain in 2016, but have changed my mind. And, well, it'd be a travesty, I think, if there was a second referendum.
Can I ask you what's made you change your mind?
Lots of issues, really, but mostly the treatment of leavers, I would think. I work with a lot of disadvantaged people who did vote to leave, and I think it's really unfair that they've been smeared and labelled as fascists, and you know, it's just not right.
Let me just take one more point before I go back to the panel. The woman at the very back with the glasses.
We're talking about whether we think a general election can solve Brexit. I think actually we've forgotten that Vote Leave is accused of breaking electoral law. Dominic Cummings, who is currently is an advisor to Boris Johnson, is currently in such a position of power, yet he refused to stand before Parliament and talk about breaking electoral law. He's in contempt of Parliament. I'm not sure whether we can ever have a free and democratic and fair election before those issues are sorted out. I'm not sure we can solve Brexit in this way.
I think when it comes to the Leave.EU campaign, they, as far as I know, they were cleared of a number of things, actually. So I'm not entirely sure that you're right about that. Yeah. They were accused of overspending, and they spent money on... But no criminal charges were brought in the end, were they?
Absolutely not.
No criminal charges were brought against the Leave.EU campaign.
I think you'll find some Remain groups were fined as well by the Electoral Commission.
Absolutely. The vast majority of allegations about both the Leave campaigns were proved to be completely unfounded. This was propaganda, and the Electoral Commission, which is highly biased, refused to investigate the other side to the extent it investigated.
Well, I'm not sure they'd agree they're highly biased either. But anyway, I'm going to take a couple of points before I go back to the panel. Yes, the man in the yellow shirt at the very back.
OK, so I voted for Jonathan's party, Labour, in 2017, under the premise that they'd respect and support the outcome of the 2016 referendum. Since then, you know, I can't believe you have the absolute audacity to sit there and criticise Boris when he's actually made an effort to get us out and respect what we voted for. I mean, you have sold... It's almost like you've got a case of Remain amnesia. You've sold your soul out to the Liberal elite. And the irony is, a lot of them aren't very satisfied with you either. They're going towards Layla and the Lib Dems. So actually, people up and down this country tonight are going trick-or-treating. I really hope that you don't fool people the second time round. And I hope that the latest poll readings give you a Halloween fright.
And let me just say one last thing. The woman sitting next to you. Yes, the woman sitting next to you there.
I personally think that a general election won't solve the problem of Brexit and that we should put it back into the hands of the people. Because I, as part of the almost
So you want another referendum?
Yes. I want another referendum because I, as part of the almost 1 million young people who were born between 1998 and 2001 who can now vote, want a say in something that's going to impact the rest of my life.
Right. Well, John, Paul, you've both got points you need to come back to. John, do you want to start?
I don't think democracy is something to be scared of, and ultimately the people should decide. This is one of the biggest questions facing the country.
They have done, Jonathan, they have
I know,
done.
but some people thought we would leave with a no deal. So the sort of Brexit Party and Nigel Farage say we should have a clean break, a World Trade Organisation no deal. Boris Johnson is putting forward a deal which we don't agree with, and the gentleman here in the T-shirt who, you know, I respect the way in which you put your views in a very forthright way. We did say in our manifesto that we respected the result, but we couldn't support a damaging no-deal Brexit, nor could we support a Brexit which undermines workplace rights and environmental standards. And I'm afraid that's what Boris Johnson's deal does. The Tory party, by the way, is playing games. Boris Johnson's deal got through its first stage in Parliament, and then Boris Johnson pulled the bill and refused to negotiate in Parliament with the other parties about getting a sensible timetable. So Boris Johnson's Tory party is playing games with Brexit as well, I'm afraid.
And can I just ask you, because Donald Trump decided to weigh in this evening into the election, as I'm sure
he was criticising the deal,
heard of it.
wasn't
Yes, he was talking also about Jeremy Corbyn and saying that he would be bad for the country.
Look. Donald
Did you think that was an endorsement?
No, Donald Trump tonight has endorsed Boris Johnson. The reason Donald Trump tonight has endorsed Boris Johnson is because he knows if he gets a trade deal with Boris Johnson, the NHS will be put up for sale in that trade deal. And the US will smash up our pharmaceutical code, which will mean our NHS is forced to pay £500 million a week. That is why Donald Trump has endorsed Boris Johnson tonight.
You answer that, but also you need to answer the question from the audience.
To do that. Says the man that worked in the Treasury that bought more and more PFIs for hospitals across the country.
No, I didn't.
That's a lie. We actually sit there. You can't sit there seriously saying that we're going to do a trade deal with this country that's going to mean we pay more for goods, not less. That's
pay more for pharmaceuticals. £500 million more. The NHS will be paying
trade deals
under your policy
is that it's better for our economy.
I don't think you understand.
So why does Donald Trump say that we're not interested in your NHS? Why does Matt Hancock says the NHS is not for sale? So what we have done this week, we have spoken to a US pharmaceutical company, and what we've got them to do finally is to get access for those living with cystic fibrosis, life-saving drugs with Orkambi and things after that. That is only by speaking to US pharmaceutical companies, so finally we can actually save people's lives. But to answer the question of that lady in the middle that was talking about a second referendum, that will not end uncertainty for any time soon, because it will take at least 6 to 9 months to have that uncertainty. A general election we can get done in a few weeks, and if we have a Conservative majority government, yes, on December the 12th, that's the few weeks that we have for a general election. And then we can pass the deal that the EU have agreed to, that Parliament has started to agree to, but was starting to play games, hence it's not representative of the people. So we can now move on, get Brexit done, so that we can speak about the domestic agenda that gentleman was speaking to. Because we have more GPs in training now than ever before.
Less GPs.
We're putting more money into the NHS than ever before. We want to level up our education funding. We want to put more policemen on the street. These are the things that affect people on a day-to-day basis beyond Brexit, and that's so important that we get this and talk about this over the next month.
I would like to come in here.
Layla, briefly, and then, goodness me. Layla, briefly, and then you, Isabel.
Getting Boris Johnson a majority and passing this bad deal. And actually, John's absolutely right about what Trump wants to do. Absolutely right about that. But there are two things you need to be straight with people. This is not the end. This is the end of the withdrawal agreement. And by the way, 3 days to scrutinise what was hundreds of pages. That's not our job, is to do this for all of our constituents, whether they be Remain or Leave. We have to do that. That is our job. He stopped us from doing that. But can you be straight? This is going to be years more negotiating the political declaration, the next step of the deal.
And actually, Layla, can I just say...
Which will be delayed for 9 months if we have a second referendum, which might not solve it.
In the interest of fairness, he also said this evening that the Boris Johnson's deal, or certain aspects of it, would mean that the US couldn't do a trade deal with the UK.
I see no aspect in there that's actually going to stop us doing a trade deal with the States.
We're
going to come out of the customs union, we're going to come out of the single market, and so this is fully available for us to do trade deals.
I want to come in here on the NHS thing, because, Jonathan, look, I think you should be better than this. You are better than this, I know you are, than to talk this utter bollocks about the...
In my brief tenure question time, that's now the second time that word's been used.
Well, you know perfectly well that there is no question of the NHS being sold off to the US. You know that perfectly well. You also know that there are multiple American companies already involved in the delivery of NHS services, and frankly most patients don't really care ultimately which company delivers which services. They just want good care.
Well, can I respond to your...
Can I just let Mairead get the word? Very briefly, John. Very briefly, I must let Mairead in.
This is about pharmaceutical companies, and the US pharmaceuticals have said they want access to our markets, and they want to force our NHS to pay more for the medicines that they manufacture.
Do you know what?
And it will double the NHS medicine bill. It will double the NHS medicine bill, and it will mean £500 million a week leaving our NHS and going to big US pharmaceuticals. That is why government trade officials were meeting US pharmaceutical companies as recently as this August. The NHS is for sale, and this general election is about saving the NHS.
Unlike President Trump, I am not going to interfere in this general election. So I preface my remarks. But can I just say, I was fascinated that in that interview it appeared the Prime Minister had talked about the details of the deal with the President of the United States. But there is one issue I need to just kill here. This idea of getting Brexit done as an overnight switch off and we move on and forget all about it. I'm sorry, that just is not the case. We are going to have to live with whatever comes. I mean, when we get the withdrawal agreement through, I'm not going to say if, but when we get it through, that is just the start of a very difficult process. And this week, Michel Barnier said that. This will be the toughest ever negotiations, because extraordinarily, never in history has a country pulled away from a trade agreement with a very big partner that is the European Union, and also, if you like, threatened or has decided to reduce or change regulations away from the European standards. So we will have a difficult negotiation to deal with. So I would just ask you all to be very patient and really to adjust your sets, because this is definitely going to be with us for much longer than any of us wish. And also, when I listen to this conversation, I'm moving over a little because it is going to be heated because there is an election on. Remember that the European Parliament has got to scrutinise this deal as well, and we will not do that until the House of Commons does it. And we take our duties as seriously as the House of Commons. So really, I mean, it isn't for me, but I do think whatever comes of an election, Brexit is there. It's hung over all our heads since 2016. It will continue to do that in whatever form it takes until we get to a place where we have this new relationship developed post-Brexit, which I hope is close, but one never knows.
But I'm sure you'll agree that at least at that point, by taking back our laws, by being able to do trade deals and getting
the US with Trump,
we'll at least be talking about how we're leaving, not whether we're leaving, not rehashing the same argument we've had for 3.5 years, which has been stymieing.
This is the second time that the European Union has negotiated a withdrawal agreement, and this is it. I mean, we did go back and reopen, and it was around Northern Ireland, which is a sensitive issue, of course, for Ireland and the constituency I represent. But I think that the idea of it being done, I would worry that you could get done by Brexit. I think you have to be very careful about this, because this is a very big issue, not just for the UK, but also for the European Union. I would love your politics to settle down. And I do get a bit concerned when I hear politicians say, well, we need to deal with all the domestic things that we haven't been able to do because of Europe. And that is just not simply true. I mean, domestic issues are dealt with in all member states, but we try to deal with other issues collectively. So please be warned, I don't want this and I don't wish this, but Brexit is a long-term issue because we have to form a new relationship, unless, of course, something dramatic happens in the election campaign.
So there's something to look forward to, everybody. I'm going to take another question, but before I do, I just want to tell you that next week we will be in Glasgow. And if you'd like to be in the audience, call 0330 123 9988 or go to the Question Time website and you can follow the instructions there. Well, let's take a question now from Kate McGowan.
Is UK politics no longer a safe space for women?
Yes, a number of women MPs have talked about the abuse they've been getting, and some in the case of Heidi Allen, for example. Heidi Allen says, I'm exhausted by the invasion into my privacy and the nastiness and intimidation that has become commonplace, and that's been echoed by a number of women MPs. Layla, what's your feeling?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when I see actually great women from all parties leaving politics in the way that they are, and okay, I don't always agree with the likes of Amber Rudd and Nicky Morgan, and I'm so sorry to see my new colleague Heidi Allen go as well for these reasons. It makes me sad. It makes me think that, yeah, something is going on out there that is very definitely getting worse over the last 2.5 years since I was elected. I've seen it get worse for myself. We've also faced sometimes physical intimidation. You walk out of the doors of Parliament, and I have had someone sort of shout at me, traitor, and it's very scary. And it's on all sides, and it's not okay. It's not okay. What worries me the most about it, though, is I think of, young women perhaps out there in either the audience or watching on television thinking, I'd love to be an MP. I really want to do this, and they're put off. And all I want to say to them is, it is a great job. We will get through this. This has always been the case that women make way for other women, and we will fix this. And I don't know how yet, but we have to. But please, if you're a woman out there thinking you want to get involved in politics, don't be put off. We need you now more than ever.
Isabel? Is it a safe place? And if it isn't, who's to blame?
I really don't like the expression about safe spaces. I feel that politics has always been rough and tough. It's a brutal game. But, look, this isn't just about women parliamentarians. Female journalists, I don't want to make this about me because it isn't, but all of us that are involved in this debate find it very difficult. It is really horrible. I mean, after this show, I will be bombarded with hate mail. It happens every time. It's deeply unpleasant. The trolling that you get on social media is hideous. We basically don't look at it because it is so traumatizing, really. And it is awful that the debate has been kind of brutalized in this way, and I wish it wasn't like that.
Why do you think that's happening?
But I think for parliamentarians, I hope that good, effective female MPs won't walk away like this. You've got to continue to believe that the good you can do as an MP outweighs whatever kind of suffering that you might have about being called names.
Well, it's more than that for some MPs. It's death threats. It's saying to MPs, we know where your children are. I mean, MPs being left to carry out a lot. I mean, why do you think it's happening?
I think that it is partly a Brexit. I mean, these are old arguments. Social media, of course, where people, most of the nasty stuff I get comes from anonymous people who take a lot of trouble. They go to a lot of trouble to make it difficult to track them down. And I also think that Brexit has been incredibly polarising. And there are a lot of people out there who feel incredibly let down by our parliamentarians. And I have to say to you, Layla, if you just decided to overturn Brexit, I think it would get worse. I really do.
But we also heard, I honestly think...
Yeah, I want to hear from the audience, so very briefly.
Just very briefly, I think we just all have to be very mindful of what we say. We heard that if you didn't leave by the 31st of October, there'd be rioting, And I think every time that you hear a politician raise that kind of level, and we heard it from the Prime Minister, calling Paula Sheriff, my friend in the House, a Labour Party politician, standing up and saying, I'm being called a traitor, I'm getting these death threats. They're saying the language you're using to me. And he said, humbug. You know, we have to all mind our language and all be aware that what we say, and in this campaign in particular, I implore other politicians to, you know, tone it down. We lead by example. We've all got an example to set.
The woman there in the maroon top.
So I'm a 17-year-old student. I'm studying politics at the moment, and I really hope to pursue politics as a career in the future. And the news about Nicky Morgan this morning actually really broke my heart and really scared me. I think that this issue of, you know, polarisation isn't just because of Brexit. It's actually been around since, you know, even 2010, after contempt for MPs was raised, after, you know, a lot of scandal, essentially. And I think that
you think of the expenses scandal?
Expenses scandal, exactly that. And I think, Layla, your point about, you know, stopping Brexit altogether, do you not think that will just fuel contempt absolutely further on both sides, and make the situation worse?
The man here in the blue jacket.
Abuse on all sides, whether it's for lady or male MPs, is wrong and it's out of order. However, Parliament itself has got to set the standard. And we can see already from this panel and from the discussions we've heard today that the election process is going to make matters worse. You've got to set a better standard to the citizens you're supposed to support. And a lot of the abuse that you get, you bring on yourselves by the examples you set.
Do you think Boris Johnson has been setting a good example?
Yeah, this is a guy that's been showing strong leadership. I think he's been, as I say, this is a guy that's trying to get things done, because actually what you find with something that's been causing division, you've got some people and some parties that are trying to further that division, and you've got people that are actually trying to get things done to be able to move on this country and to move on this Parliament as well. And I tell you what, I see the frustration in this room, I see the frustration outside this room, and I share it. I sit there in the middle of Parliament, day in, day out, thinking, what on earth am I doing here? How are we adding value as people that have been trusted by you, the electors, to show political leadership and get stuff done? Boris is actually trying to do that, but then you have one party that's trying to revoke Article 50, as you've heard. You've had another party that's actually trying to say they're going to get a third deal and then campaign against that deal in the second referendum, which is going to take months. This is just sheer madness when we've actually got to move things on. There are some excellent women that I'm really sorry to see say they're not going to stand again at this next election. Both just from my intake, I've only been a politician and MP for 4 years now, and so people have only served that short space of time. But people like Nicky Morgan that's been mentioned. And it's not just because of the attacks, although there are severe attacks on things like Twitter, which has become particularly nasty, but it exacerbates personal issues as well, because Parliament is a really harsh place to be, especially at the moment, because it's a war of attrition. And I know that may be the world's smallest violin for some people when they're looking in at MPs, but unfortunately it's really hard on families, it's really hard on people with the hours that they have and with the abuse that they're getting on social media.
Jon, I just wondered what you... I mean, also want you to answer the question, but I also wondered what you thought about some research that came out early this month. It was an academic study, and it found that between 60 and 70% of Leave voters thought violence towards MPs is a price worth paying for Brexit. And amongst Remainers, it was still pretty high, a bit lower, but well over 50%.
Well, I did see that headline. I also did see... I've not read the research. I did see the headline.
It was quite flawed. I read it.
Well, that's
flawed.
the point I was going to make. Yeah. There were others saying, actually, the headline was misleading. Actually, that wasn't quite what the research was suggesting. But let me just make a broader point to everybody watching, because we're going to have a general election in a few weeks, aren't we? And you're going to be sick to death of us politicians. All the politicians on this panel, we're human beings. We get some things right. We get some things wrong. All of us want the best for this country and our children and our grandchildren. We have passionate views about what policies we should implement to improve this country, and we disagree with each other. But our motives are all honourable. And I just want you to know that, because I know we're going to have arguments here, and to you, sir, we should raise the tone of our debate, and I agree. But when it comes to it, we do want the best for the country, but we just have different views about how we get there. But I would say the abuse that women are getting, it is women, it doesn't tend to be men, it does tend to be female MPs, is horrendous. Women MPs aren't going to go out and broadcast this, but I know countless women MPs who walk around with panic alarms because they've been advised to walk around with a panic alarm by their local police force. Women MPs who've had to have extra security put in their houses. I've seen Diane Abbott gets horrendous racist abuse. My friend Luciana Berger gets horrendous anti-Semitic abuse on social media. This has got to stop. It's horrendous, and I don't want young women turning away from careers in politics because they don't want to put themselves in that situation. Collectively, between the parties and a society, we've got to do something about it because what's going on at the moment is utterly unacceptable.
I'll come to you in a moment, Mairead, but yes, the woman there in the middle at the back.
Is that me?
Yeah.
I just want to know, how is comparing a woman in a burqa to a letterbox showing strong leadership? You say we have to lead by example, leaders have to lead by example. How is that showing a good example? I am a teacher of politics and I couldn't justify that to my class.
So I think they're words that I would not have chosen myself, but Boris will speak for himself on how he's phrased it in an article. But what if you look at the wider?
It doesn't matter how it was phrased.
If you look at the article, he was well, no, I just said I didn't. But I mean, he was making a liberal approach, an argument for people to be able to wear the burqa, to be able to actually practice the religion the way that they want to.
But so you think he shouldn't have used that form of words?
So it's not a form of words that I would have used myself, but actually, you know, as a journalist, as opposed to, I would be surprised if he'd used that as a Prime Minister in the House of Commons, but he's using it as a journalist, as a journalistic picture, I suppose, he was painting there. But as I say, it's not a form of words that I would have used.
I'm sorry, but I teach about politics. If I'm teaching kids about tolerance of different faiths and mutual respect, that goes against our British values. So why do we have a Prime Minister then in power who goes against our values? Well, no matter how he worded it, was wrong that he said it. And he has not. Can I just say, he has not yet apologised for those comments that he made. It doesn't matter about how he was going to shape them. Whichever way he was going to shape them, it was wrong for him to say. It has led to an increase in race hate crime against women in burqas. And the fact that my mother used to wear a burqa and she stopped wearing it because she feels unsafe. And as a woman who wears a hijab, and my sister who's been attacked because she's wearing a hijab, I don't like the fact that we are supporting a Prime Minister who incites hatred.
I'm not sure your evidence for actually that a single article is raising a hate crime across this country. But you know, he was making a liberal view for actually why women should be able to wear a burqa, a hijab, a niqab, whilst walking the streets of this country and feeling safe and being able to practice their religion. That was the heart of the article. But a lot of people haven't read the full article. They've actually pulled the headlines out of what they want to pull out because of the narrative that has been placed on there.
So are they wrong to be offended? I think it's perfectly fair for someone to feel offended by those words. Don't you think they have a right to feel offended? Unbelievable.
Great. What do you make of all this?
Well, I know lots of people in the House of Commons, and I think a lot of people are very stressed and are distressed by what is happening. And I know women in particular are taking the brunt of the attacks. And I think it is very sad, as this young woman said. I think it's happening across politics generally. And it's happening because today you're not allowed to be uncertain. You have to be for it or against it. You have to, it's black or it's white, which is never. So the centre ground is almost, if I'm in the centre ground, so I'm regarded as weak because I might consider things and I might change my mind. Where is the room for politics to sit down where we might differ on issues, but we sit in a room and we say, you know, let's come together on this, find a consensus. It's how Europe works, and it works particularly well because nobody wins and nobody loses. And what really saddens me, and I've been in this studio, this is my third time here, and what saddens me, and you're a great audience, because I say that first before I say what I'm going to say, is that you are as divided today as the first time I was in this studio, as a population, as a society. And I think that's very stressful on the society and very damaging because normally we've had referendum in Ireland, and we've had them twice, by the way, and nobody, you know, we worked on it. But in a sense, even after those, we came together as a country. Even where we differed, we could find, you know, common ground, and we moved on and did other things. I find that in the United Kingdom, people are not moving on from the vote. People are either entrenched in their positions or angry because there isn't Brexit, or wanting a clean Brexit or whatever sort of Brexit. And I think you need to come together as a country. I think you really need to try and find a way to, or you need mediation or something to bring you together. And I fear that this election...
Marriage guidance.
Yeah, exactly. I'll do it. But I fear that this election will not allow that space. And I hope that maybe on December the 12th, that there will be a coming together afterwards. I mean, as parliamentarians in the European Parliament, we're frustrated about what's happening here, I have to say. But we're also very sad because we see your Parliament not able to come to decisions and your politics quite frozen. So, I mean, we wish you well. That's all I say in this election. I'm not, as I say, I'm not doing a President Trump on it. But I think politics matters. And that's why that young woman is so right. That I'm not sure I'd encourage my children, I have 2 boys and 2 girls, to go into politics, because even in my politics it's rough. I mean, I was described as a foreigner on Twitter just as I came into the studio, but I can cope with that. Other things are said to me, but what I do, and I agree with you, I don't read it. I know it's going to be awful, so why read it? So whoever you're going to, whatever you're saying about me, stop, because I won't read it. Don't waste your time.
Just don't bother. Let's take another question from Ishfaq Hussain.
Should the London Fire Chief be allowed to retire with a £2 million pension in the wake of the damning Grenfell report?
No. So the London Fire Chief was Danny Cotton, who came in for some personal criticism in the first report from the Grenfell inquiry, and the London Fire Brigade came in for a degree of criticism as well. John?
Well, first of all, the Grenfell fire was an absolutely devastating, unspeakable, heartbreaking tragedy. Actually, I was on Question Time the week of the Grenfell fire, and I remember it well, and I remember it, the sheer sense of shock, but also anger that there was about that something like this had been allowed to happen. There was a suspicion that it was avoidable, and I think that's what the report confirms, that the loss of life, the 72 people who lost their lives, that was avoidable. There was a suspicion that action was never taken on time on the cladding, and I think that's been pretty much confirmed now. I don't think we need to get involved in taking away this gentleman's pension.
It's Danny Cotton, she's a woman.
Sorry, her pension allowances. But I do think we need to have a proper debate as to why the sort of so-called stay-put policy was still in place when we were told there was going to be a proper inquiry into the stay-put policy. We need to understand what the implications are for that policy going forward. We've also got to wait for the second half of this.
The inquiry's called for an end to the stay-put.
Well, we've got to understand what the government are going to. Oh, well, I know we're about to go into a general election campaign, but why the government hadn't implemented that earlier, because there was an inquiry after the other tragedies that we'd seen in other parts of the country, which suggested that the stay-put policy should have been reformed. So I don't understand why those policies were not changed. But we also need to understand why some of the action that we were promised on retrofitting of sprinklers still hasn't happened, why some of the action that we were promised on removing cladding still hasn't happened. There are buildings here in Birmingham, for example, with some of this cladding. The Birmingham City Council is still waiting for the money to apply the relevant retrofitting of sprinklers, which were promised by the government. That hasn't happened. And I think we also need to have an understanding as to what the future financing of the fire brigades are, because many fire brigades across the country have been hugely cut back. The fire brigade in London has been cut back massively, actually, when Boris Johnson was the mayor. Actually, when he, talking about the tone of politics, when he was questioned about this as mayor, he told someone to get stuffed. I mean, you know, I mean, that's pretty appalling, isn't it? So that was a few years ago. That was before Grenfell, I should add. So I don't think the pension arrangements need to be changed, but we certainly need to get funding into housing to remove cladding. We need to get funding into housing to properly ensure that sprinklers are put in place, and we need proper funding put in place in our fire services.
Isabel?
Well, I'm really glad that, Jonathan, you gave such a measured answer on that, because I think some of Labour's interventions on this have been pretty appalling. I mean, your shadow Fire Minister said to a group of people on the Grenfell thing that the real enemy here is actually the Tories, which just tells you everything you need to know about how Labour regards these things. I think in terms of the firefighters, it's very clear from what we've seen of the report so far that they did make very serious mistakes. I mean, the advice to stay put when the building was burning was quite obviously discredited, and the report that we've seen so far suggests that they should have pulled back on that advice up to an hour before they did. So these were really very, very serious mistakes. And, you know, in terms of whether people should be punished for that, I think that's a side issue. There are much bigger lessons to be learned. And I think that the process that we are going through, although it is taking a very, very long time to get the lessons out there, will hopefully mean that this could never, ever happen again.
It's also worth pointing out the report commended the individual courage and bravery of many of the firefighters.
Pay tribute to that.
The man there in the maroon shirt.
Just coming back to the original question, should the fire chief lose their pension? I don't think so. Out of all the things that could have prevented a tragedy or changed the outcome, I don't think it's decisions of Danny Cotton, which could have made the biggest difference. I work in emergency services myself, and when the chips are down and we're making decisions quickly, it's always easy to look back on them and criticise them with hindsight, 20/20 vision.
The man in the grey jacket and the red shirt.
Years ago, when things went wrong, even though it wasn't the responsibility of cabinet ministers, they used to fall on their sword because they were in the senior position in government. In the case of the gentleman's question for the fire chief, she, like so many others, parliamentarians across both sides of the House at the moment, abdicate their responsibilities to the British people and don't resign when they should do.
I mean, she has said that she's staying on to see through the changes. That's the reason she said she's staying in.
For 6 months. What was she doing 6 months? No.
The man at the back there.
Just as a quick moment, I can't believe the Conservative MPs on the back benches, first of all, were laughing at the Jeremy Corbyn green tie for the victims of Grenfell yesterday. That's one thing. Secondly, absolutely disgusting. John, also as well, when you say about people shouldn't lose their pension, I'm not going to lie, in the job that I do, if I end up basically having people die on my watch, then I think I would be sacked and lose my pension as well.
What job do you do?
I work in communications of the emergency services, and people in that aspect, if people were to die on based on decisions that I made, I'm pretty sure that I would be, you know, taken into a tribunal and probably lose my pension as well. So just because that they're at the top of an organisation, admittedly making extremely difficult decisions, doesn't mean that they shouldn't pay a price for it if people die. Like, let's not forget how many people died in this incident. It's disgusting.
Let me just take one more question before I go back to the panel. Yes, the woman in the green top there.
I feel very uncomfortable with all the blame being on the fire service when there weren't even high enough ladders in London to reach the top. They had to send for them down from Sussex or somewhere. And all the time, the service is being cut back to the bone, as the gentleman was saying on the panel, by the Tory mayor of London at that time. And the brave men and women of the fire service are blamed for something when really the government should examine themselves.
Marie, you've been watching this from afar.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think this is a tragedy that we all watched in her, and I'm conscious that there might be family members watching this programme, and our heart goes out to them. They will never recover from it. And the fact that the cladding, I mean, I can still see the fire as it happened. I mean, the question of the pension, I'm not sure. I mean, will it help? Will it do anything for the families that are bereaved? I think what will do something for them is that there is some changes, that this cannot happen again, and that there is investment, because I think in all our services, and I don't know the details of yours here, but there needs to be change, there needs to be training, and the equipment, as that lady has pointed out, needs to be standard. It's interesting that in the US, as I understand it, firefighters are lauded. They're really top of the tree because people realise that they risk their lives to save others. And I think we do need to put our firefighters in that bracket, but they need to have the resources and the training. And, you know, again, going back to the families, it must be horrific for them to even listen to this report. And I think they've had such dignity in how they've dealt with it. And you just hope that they will just manage to survive and lift their hearts again, because it is awful when somebody dies in a tragedy like this. And it's one of the things, and I suppose after my tirade of people not being united, I think, in fact, on those tragic moments, the country does unite, and the people do come together because they see their brothers and sisters suffering in a terrible way. Elena.
Right, I'm very, obviously, how can you not think of the families this week? And can I just say, I just think it was appalling that this report was leaked a day early, when the idea was that they would have the time to be able to digest it before it got into the news, and I just think that was awful. What I'm hearing from the question is, you know, the anger. There is absolutely anger, and this should never have happened. This should never happen. But I've been, you know, the people who run Grenfell United and speak out about this have said over and over again, they're not looking for just, you know, a scapegoat. They're not looking for platitudes. They're not looking for promises anymore. What they want is action. What they want is for this never, ever to happen again. And I'm worried that it has taken this long, that, you know, 2.5 years later, you know, this was at the first week of this Parliament, and here we are in the last week of this Parliament, and there's still 300 buildings in this country that have that cladding. We're still, now, phase 2, I hope, will happen very, very quickly. But ultimately, we have to think of them and make this the most healing thing that we can for them. And I'm sure all of us here who are either in government now or might be at some point will say to them, we will absolutely carry out all the recommendations in that report, and we will do everything we can to make sure no body, child, adult, anyone ever has to go through the horror of that night.
Paul.
I'm a London MP. I go past Grenfell many, many times, and it really is a monument to the tragedy that happened. I've met a number of people from Grenfell United. The bravery that they have for just keep campaigning, just using that tragedy to make sure it can never happen again, to make sure that they can speak out and speak for those people that died that have no voice.
And if you're in government, if you continue to be in government, will you recommend the
the
suggestions made in
so
this
the government, in
report?
principle, have accepted the recommendations, and we're wanting to make sure that we can bring them in as quickly as possible. That was the point of having the report in the first place. It's an independent report. We want to make sure that we can learn all the lessons, that we can actually and take on board everything that is there. There's no sense of scapegoating the fire service. As has been said, they have performed and continue to perform an amazing job. There were clear things that were outlined in that report where there was some failures in decision-making, which we need to make sure that we can improve on. I've had 2 fires in flats in my constituency just in the last year alone, one in a tower block, and I saw the emergency services, and it was a clad tower block. The emergency services, the way that they responded post-Grenfell, using some of the learning already. And then just last month, you may have remembered in Worcester Park, there was a smaller block, that burnt down in 20 minutes. There's no way it should have burnt down that quickly, and there's an investigation going on at that moment. And that was something that, fortunately, there was no one killed. But it was something that you know, the fire service is so aware of now, but the government wants to make sure that we can do everything to learn the lessons, not just from the emergency services and their response, but from the quality of the building as well, the building control.
Which, of course, will be the subject of the second report. We've just got 5 minutes left now. I'm just going to squeeze in one last question, if I may, which is from Melissa Danks.
If Nelson Mandela could shake the hand of FWD clerk, when is it ever acceptable to refuse a similar gesture between civilised people in the public eye?
So, Melissa, I assume you're referring to Sajid Javid, the Chancellor, of course, who's been talking about the fact that Hugh Grant refused to shake his hand at an event earlier on, when Sajid Javid said, lovely to meet you. So he's been very cross about that. Isabel?
I've had the misfortune to have encounters with Hugh Grant, funnily enough, at the...
He speaks so highly of you, Isabel.
Funnily enough, at a Lib Dem conference many years ago. He's an incredibly rude man. And I don't think it was acceptable to behave the way he did. I mean, you know, there are ways of handling this. I remember this happening, I think, to David Cameron at some EU summit, and he stuck out his hand, and whoever it was, I think it was maybe Francois Hollande or someone like that, wouldn't shake it back, and Cameron just sauntered past and patted him on the back, and he kind of carried it off in style. So, look, this is bad manners, but there are ways of styling it out.
Styling it out. John?
I mean, I think it is rude and bad manners. Look, we're going to go into a divisive general election campaign. I'm going to be having a go at my Tory opponents about the NHS, about school cuts, about police cuts.
You can feel free to shake hands now.
But at the end of it, I will shake my Tory opponent's hand because we've got to have a bit more decency in public life and politics, haven't we?
Do you want to do it now? Come on.
Let's all shake hands.
Shall we all Mairead? I mean, is there anyone whose hands you wouldn't shake, on principle?
I've met people who will not shake hands for religious reasons, so I've had to deal with that. I think, you know, in a way, it's rude not to shake hands, but if somebody wants to make a point, and that's how they make it, so be it. But I know that in the next few weeks, you're going to be shaking a lot of hands, and there will be people who won't want to shake your hand, because they won't vote for you. That's just the way it is. We've all experienced that. So you have to just be able to live with it. I wouldn't mind if Hugh Grant shook my hand.
You wouldn't mind? I wouldn't mind if you shook my hand either, but there we are.
I said it first.
The one with the red hair.
Isn't this just indicative of how childish our politics has got? Should we be looking at people as people rather than just the things? They're not just one issue people. We have a whole range of things that we think, so instead of just looking at that one thing, this is where we need to communicate, and we need to be talking to people about everything they believe in and seeing each other as people and treating them as such instead of this childish school ground politics that we seem to have got into.
So Hugh Grant was saying, in the interest of fairness, that he wouldn't shake Javid's hand because Sajid Javid was rude and dismissive to the victims of press abuse when he was culture secretary. That's what Hugh Grant said in his defence. Yes, the woman there with her hand up.
Surely there's bigger things to worry about other than just whether someone's willing to shake your hand. Like, maybe think about something like the B word, Brexit.
Well,
the NHS.
I mentioned simply because the Chancellor was clearly rather upset by it. Layla, we've only got a couple of minutes left.
No, I mean, look, I quite often, I'm sort of, shake my hand, and sometimes you get people, as Mairead said, who don't always want to. I do agree, though, that we need to see each other as people a bit more. And, you know, coming back to some of the stuff we were talking about, abuse and whatever, actually, if everyone just for a second took a minute to see the person behind the persona or the job or whatever it is, I do think that that is the way forward. And maybe we can have an election campaign and even a society that does a bit more of that. That would be nice, wouldn't it?
A group hug.
A group hug.
Paul?
I'm not sure the set lends itself to that, but look, I think the thing is, if you're trying to change the law or trying to change anything like Hugh Grant was trying to do, then actually pulling away from people like that, those decision makers, is the wrong thing to do, clearly. But you're right, we're all right that people have said we've got to see people as people. We've gone full circle because we started off earlier talking about social media. And actually, one thing I do tend to do every now and again, I do read my social media, and I sometimes answer back to prove that there is a person on the other end, not just a PR company, or it's not just a face with a blue tick or something like that. There are real people that have feelings, have emotions, and there are ramifications for language that you use, actions you take, or in this case, don't take.
Yeah, and it was a political act not to shake hands. It was a very strong political signal. So, I mean, if that's what he wanted to convey, it probably worked.
It's got us talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But do shake their hands if you meet them out and about, please. They're all lovely people.
And also, here we are on Halloween and at the start of an election campaign, and there's been an outbreak of peace and love on Question Time. Isn't that great? Do you think it will last, folks? Anyway, look, our hour is up. Next week we're in Glasgow, so call 0330 123 99 88 if you'd like to be in the audience, or you can go to the Question Time website in the usual way and follow the instructions there. And if you want to have your say on tonight's topics, you can keep talking about all these things. You can join Adrian, Charles and guests on Question Time Extra Time, and that is on 5 Live now. But for now, thank you very much to my panel. Thank you very much to all of you for coming here tonight and putting your points and questions, and thank you to you for watching and listening at home. From Birmingham, bye-bye.
Next, Brexit Cast. Just before that this Halloween night, a taste of one of the most terrifying stories ever told. Coming soon to BBC One, Steel Yourself to meet Dracula.